They blocked a black billionaire from her own jet. What happens next will shock you. Comment below from city you're watching and hit the subscribe button. She was a self-made billionaire, a woman who built her empire from nothing, who fought through walls of prejudice, rejection, and doubt, until her name stood among the richest in the world. Yet on one ordinary day, in a private airport, everything shattered. The jet on the runway was hers, paid for in full, maintained by her staff. It bore her name in the registration papers, and yet, when she walked toward it, ready to fly to an international meeting that could change lives forever, security stopped her cold, their eyes narrowed, their voices firm. "Sorry, ma'am, you can't board this plane." She thought it was a mistake, a miscommunication. But the look on their faces told a darker story. They didn't see a powerful woman. They didn't see an accomplished leader. They saw only her skin. And in that moment, her billions meant nothing. Imagine standing in front of everything you've worked for, every dream you turned into reality, only to be told you don't belong. The humiliation burned, the injustice cut deep. But this wasn't just about her. This was about every door that had been slammed in her face before. Every time the world whispered, "People like you don't deserve this." As cameras started flashing, the world watched. Some laughed, some raged, some cried. But everyone asked the same question. How could a billionaire, someone who owned the jet, be treated as though she was trespassing on her own success? This wasn't just a story about wealth. It was a story about power, prejudice, and dignity. And the moment she chose to respond would determine not just her fate, but how history remembered her. So what did she do next? Did she break down? Did she fight back? Or did she deliver a response so powerful that it shook the world to its core? She wasn't born into wealth. Far from it. Her story began in a cramped one-bedroom apartment, where broken windows let in the cold and where the hum of old appliances was the only background music to her childhood. Her mother worked double shifts, sometimes triple, just to keep the lights on. Her father, a man who believed in dreams bigger than the world allowed him, often told her, "Never let them tell you what you can't be." For years, she carried those words like armor. School was a battlefield, where whispers followed her every step. She won't make it. Girls like her don't go far. Teachers overlooked her, classmates doubted her, and doors closed before she even had the chance to knock. But each insult became fuel. Every rejection lit another fire in her heart. She didn't just want to survive. She wanted to rise. And rise she did. By her early 20s, she was building businesses no one thought would succeed. She invested in people others ignored. She entered industries dominated by men, and she didn't just compete, she dominated. Real estate, tech, luxury goods. With every year, her empire grew. And with every milestone, the world had to swallow its doubt and face an undeniable truth. She was unstoppable. But power doesn't erase prejudice. The more successful she became, the more she felt the subtle sting of suspicion. At meetings, she noticed the hesitation in executives' voices when they realized she was the one running the show. At luxury stores, she caught the lingering stares of clerks who wondered if she truly belonged. Even when she bought her first private jet, there were murmurs. How could she afford it? As though her billions were an illusion, as though her success was a trick. Still, she pressed on. She wasn't just building wealth, she was building proof. Proof that barriers could be broken. Proof that a black woman could rise to the very top. She began funding schools, mentoring young entrepreneurs, donating millions to causes the world ignored. For many, she became a living symbol of possibility. And yet, symbols often become targets. On a humid morning, in the heart of summer, she prepared for one of the most important trips of her career. An international summit awaited her, where leaders and visionaries would gather to discuss trade deals, investments, and innovations. This wasn't just another meeting. It was a stage where her voice could influence the future. She dressed not just with elegance, but with power. A tailored black suit, subtle gold jewelry, heels that echoed with confidence. Her car rolled through the gates of the private airport. The airstrip stretched out before her, lined with polished jets gleaming under the sun. Cameras weren't there yet. This was supposed to be private. She stepped out, her assistant trailing with documents, her pilot already waiting near the stairs of her jet. Everything seemed seamless. But then, small details broke the rhythm. She noticed unfamiliar faces near her jet. 2 new security officers she hadn't seen before, their postures rigid, their expressions unreadable. At first, she thought nothing of it. Airports change staff all the time. But when she approached, their eyes locked onto her, cold and searching. She smiled politely, ready to stride past. But one stepped forward, hand raised like a wall. "Excuse me, ma'am. You can't board this plane." At first, she laughed. A light, almost playful laugh. Surely this was a mistake. Surely they recognized who she was. But as silence hung heavy in the air, and as the guard's stance hardened, the laugh faded. A strange chill ran through her chest. She owned this jet. She had the registration papers in her name. She had the crew waiting for her arrival. And yet, in this moment, none of it seemed to matter. Her assistant looked confused, fumbling through documents, whispering, "This is her plane. She owns it. Please check again." But the guards didn't flinch. Their tone sharpened. Their gaze narrowed. She realized something then. This wasn't about security protocol. This wasn't about paperwork. This was about something far older, far deeper. A silent judgment that followed her everywhere, no matter how high she climbed. And though she didn't yet know it, the next few minutes would explode into a story that the world would never forget. Because this wasn't just a boarding delay. This was the beginning of a storm, one that would ignite headlines, spark outrage, and force the world to confront a question it still refuses to answer. When a black billionaire can be stopped from entering her own jet. What does that say about the rest of us? The air was thick with silence, a silence so sharp it could cut through steel. The billionaire stood at the foot of her own jet, her assistant clutching documents that proved ownership, and yet 2 security guards stood like immovable statues in front of her. Their uniforms gleamed in the sunlight, their radios buzzing faintly, but their message was clear. You don't belong here. For a woman who had fought her way through every barrier society had placed in her path, this moment was different. It wasn't a boardroom where she could argue her case. It wasn't a courtroom where evidence could be laid bare. It wasn't even a hostile meeting where her billions could command respect. This was raw, stripped of power, stripped of influence. She was being told to her face that her skin outweighed her success. The assistant's voice shook as she pleaded. This is her jet. Here, look at the registration papers. Look at the ownership records. It's in her name. She's the one paying for this hangar, this runway, everything. One of the guards smirked. Not a smile, but the kind of subtle curl of the lip that says, "We don't care what you own. We don't care who you are." "Ma'am," he said firmly, "step back. You are not authorized to board." The billionaire's pulse thundered in her ears. She could feel her heart hammering against her ribs. A crowd was starting to gather. Maintenance workers, ground staff, even passengers from nearby flights. Phones began to rise, cameras flashing, recording, streaming live. Her humiliation was no longer private. But then, the shift came. She raised her chin, straightened her back, and spoke, not in anger, but with a voice so steady, so sharp, it sliced through the air like a blade. "You are denying me access to my own property. My name is on that jet. My money bought it. My company fuels it. And yet you stand here telling me I don't belong?" The crowd stirred. Whispers spread like wildfire. "That's her jet. She owns it. Why are they stopping her?" But the guards didn't move. And then, like fate had been waiting for this exact moment, the press arrived. Dozens of reporters flooded the tarmac, tipped off by airport staff. Microphones, cameras, drones. Suddenly the private humiliation became a global spectacle. She was no longer just a woman denied entry. She was the headline, the story, the proof that even billions couldn't shield her from discrimination. Her attorney, rushing onto the scene, brandished thick folders of legal proof. "Gentlemen," he barked, "you are trespassing on private property and unlawfully detaining my client. Every second you keep her here is another lawsuit, one you will not win." But the guards doubled down. "Orders from above," one muttered. "Orders from above." Those 3 words were gasoline on the fire. The camera zoomed in, capturing the billionaire's face as she whispered, "Above or beneath?" The moment was electric. The humiliation had become a confrontation. The confrontation was about to become a reckoning, because at that very second, her phone buzzed in her pocket. A call from her boardroom, from investors, from allies watching the live stream. The world wasn't just witnessing her humiliation, it was choosing sides. And then it happened. One of the guards shoved her assistant aside, knocking the documents to the ground. Papers scattered across the runway, fluttering like wounded birds. The billionaire stepped forward, fury flashing in her eyes. For the first time in her life, she felt the weight of every insult, every rejection, every locked door crashing back down onto her shoulders. The cameras caught it all. The billionaire, trembling but unbroken, staring down men who thought they could strip her of dignity. "This," she said, her voice rising, echoing across the tarmac, "isn't about me. This is about every person who has ever been told they don't belong. This is about every woman, every child, every dreamer who was denied. Not because they weren't worthy, but because someone decided they weren't. And today, right here, right now, this ends." The crowd erupted. Cheers, shouts, applause. Phones live-streamed her words to millions. Hashtags exploded online. "Let her fly. Her jet, her right." And as her attorney stood beside her, lifting the scattered papers high into the air for all to see, the tide shifted. Police arrived, summoned by the escalating chaos. But instead of siding with the guards, they stepped toward them, demanding answers. "On whose orders? Where's the proof she doesn't belong here?" The guards hesitated. Their authority crumbled. The cameras zoomed closer. Their radios buzzed with static, but no voice came through. The so-called orders from above suddenly disappeared into thin air, and in that split second, the balance of power flipped. The billionaire stepped forward again, no longer pleading, no longer defending, but claiming. She placed her hand on the railing of the jet stairs, her gaze fierce, unshakable. The cameras froze on that moment, a symbol, an image that would travel the globe. But just as she lifted her foot to step aboard, a voice boomed through the speakers of the airport terminal. "Stop her." Every head turned. From the glass windows, above, a figure emerged, a senior airport official, flanked by lawyers and corporate representatives, the real face behind the curtain, the one who had given the orders. And suddenly, the story wasn't just about two guards and one woman. It was about the system, the power, the institution that had decided without reason, without justice, that she didn't belong. The billionaire froze. Not out of fear, but because she knew this was it. The turning point, the climax, the moment. That would decide whether she would walk onto her jet in triumph or be dragged away in disgrace. The crowd held its breath. The cameras zoomed in. The guards looked shaken, and the billionaire whispered, just loud enough for the microphones to catch, "Then let the world see what happens next." And with those words, everything shifted. The airport official stepped forward, ready to deliver his own command. The billionaire braced herself for the fight of her life, because this was no longer about one flight. This was about history, and history was about to be written, right there on that runway. For a moment, the runway was frozen in silence. The billionaire stood at the foot of her jet, hand gripping the railing, cameras flashing from every angle, the crowd holding its collective breath. Above her, the airport official glared down from the glass window, flanked by lawyers and executives, his voice still echoing in the air, "Stop her!" But the world had already seen enough. The live streams had gone viral. News outlets across continents were breaking in with live coverage. Hashtags were trending. Worldwide, "Let her fly," "Her jet, her right," "Billionaire blocked." And suddenly, this wasn't just her battle anymore. It had become everyone's. Police officers on the tarmac, once hesitant, now stepped forward with authority. "On whose orders?" one demanded again, this time louder, sharper. The guards shifted uncomfortably, sweat trickling down their brows. Their radios buzzed with silence. The orders from above were no longer enough to justify the blockade. The billionaire lifted her chin, her voice calm but thunderous. "You see the papers, you see the proof, you see the cameras. The world is watching, so tell me, what exactly are you stopping me for?" There was no answer. The silence of the guards, the silence of the officials, the silence of the system itself. And that silence condemned them louder than any words could. The police looked at each other, then stepped aside. The crowd erupted, cheers, applause, voices chanting her name. The billionaire placed her foot on the first step of her jet, and this time, no one stopped her. She turned briefly, pausing mid-step to face the cameras one last time. "Let this be a reminder," she declared. "They can try to strip us of dignity, but dignity is not theirs to take. It belongs to us, and we will never give it up." The roar of the crowd followed her as she climbed the stairs, head held high, shoulders squared. The image of her boarding her jet became immortal, a symbol of triumph, not humiliation. The fallout was swift and seismic. Within hours, the story dominated global headlines. Major networks replayed the footage endlessly, the guards blocking her path, the scattering papers, her fiery declaration, the official revealed at the window. Public outrage boiled over. Protesters marched outside the airport within 24 hours, holding signs. Her jet, her right. We all belong. Dignity can't be denied. The airport's administration scrambled to issue statements, fumbling between excuses. Security, protocols, miscommunication, unfamiliar staff. But none of it stuck. The video evidence was too clear, the truth too obvious. By the third day, the CEO of the airport authority resigned under pressure. Lawsuits were filed, investigations launched, and officials grilled on live television. The orders from above that had once been whispered in secrecy were now dissected under the glaring spotlight of public scrutiny. But beyond the institutions, something far more powerful was happening. A global conversation. People everywhere began sharing their own stories of being denied, doubted, or dismissed because of who they were. Hashtags turned into movements. Her ordeal had become a mirror, forcing society to look at itself, and many didn't like what they saw. She could have disappeared after that day, boarded her jet, flown away, and retreated into her world of wealth, leaving the world to argue over her humiliation. But she didn't. Instead, she leaned into the storm. The next week, she called a press conference, standing at a podium in front of a wall of microphones and flashing cameras. She didn't just speak for herself, she spoke for everyone who had ever been silenced. "They tried to make me small," she said. "But I am not small, and neither are you. They tried to block me from my own jet. But this is not about a jet. This is about every locked door, every glass ceiling, every opportunity snatched away by prejudice. And if they think we are going to accept it quietly, they are wrong." Her words lit a fire. She announced a new foundation dedicated to fighting systemic discrimination in travel, business, and beyond. She pledged millions to fund lawsuits for those wrongfully denied dignity. She built scholarships, mentorship programs, and grants for underrepresented entrepreneurs. The incident that was meant to humiliate her became her weapon. What was supposed to break her only multiplied her power. Months later, the airport where the incident occurred implemented sweeping reforms. New diversity and bias training programs were mandatory, security policies were rewritten, and more importantly, oversight committees were created to prevent abuse of power. The guards who blocked her were dismissed. The official who gave the order faced lawsuits and public disgrace. And the billionaire? She was no longer just a business mogul. She had become a symbol. Magazines featured her on their covers. Documentaries chronicled her rise. Universities invited her to speak. To millions, she was proof that success alone wasn't enough to protect you from prejudice. But courage could turn humiliation into history. And for young girls watching across the globe, girls in cramped apartments with broken windows, just like where she began, her story became a beacon. A reminder that no matter how many walls the world built, they could still break through. Months later, the airport where the incident occurred implemented sweeping reforms. New diversity and bias training programs were mandatory. Security policies were rewritten, and more importantly, oversight committees were created to prevent abuse of power. The guards who blocked her were dismissed. The official who gave the order faced lawsuits and public disgrace. And the billionaire? She was no longer just a business mogul. She had become a symbol. Magazines featured her on their covers. Documentaries chronicled her rise. Universities invited her to speak. To millions, she was proof that success alone wasn't enough to protect you from prejudice. But courage could turn humiliation into history. And for young girls watching across the globe, girls in cramped apartments with broken windows just like where she began, her story became a beacon. A reminder that no matter how many walls the world built, they could still break through. For her, though, the impact was deeply personal. That night, after the chaos, after the press, after the jet finally lifted into the skies, she sat alone by the window, staring out at the stars. She thought of her father's words, "Never let them tell you what you can't be." She thought of her mother, who once worked triple shifts just to keep the lights on. And she thought of the young version of herself, quiet, doubted, dismissed, who could never have imagined this moment. Tears welled in her eyes, not of weakness, but of release. She had carried battles her whole life, and in that one climactic moment on the runway, she had carried them all at once, and won. But she knew it wasn't over. The fight wasn't finished. And that, perhaps, was the truest lesson of all. Because this story, her story, is not just about a billionaire, a jet, or an airport scandal. It is about the fragility of dignity in a world too quick to judge. It is about the resilience it takes to stand tall when the world tells you to bow. And most of all, it is about the truth that no amount of wealth, power, or status can shield us from prejudice, but courage can transform that prejudice into power. She was denied her jet. But she gained something far greater, a voice that could no longer be silenced, a platform that could no longer be ignored, a legacy that could no longer be erased. And so, when the history of her life is told, it will not be the billions that define her. It will not be the skyscrapers she built, the companies she led, or the luxuries she owned. It will be the day she was stopped from boarding her own jet, the day the world watched, the day she turned humiliation into history,